الله في كتاب الكريم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم سلام عليكم بما صبرتم فنعم عقبى الدار صدق الله العلي العظيم صلوات محمد وآل محمد Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says in the Holy Quran in Surah Al-Rad, chapter 13, ayah and verse 24, greetings be upon you due to you having patience. And so excellent is the end and the result of one who has patience. These are the true words of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Salawat Muhammad wa Ali Muhammad. It's important before we begin to at least establish a declaration and a testament to why we are gathered here and the importance of this gathering. For we are not alone in this gathering. We are sharing this moment with every single person that crosses our path, with the country, with the land that we're in. We have chosen such a public gathering on purpose to give a demonstration and a display, but also a physical representation of our grief, our faith, and our creed, to show people who we really are. We have gathered here to honor the greatest messenger of all time, but more so the guidance of his 12 sinless, pure leaders that came after him. In honor of who? His greatest and by far the greatest lady of all existence, his daughter, Sayyidat Nisa'il Alameen alayhi salatu wassalam. Naturally, with a gathering like this, of the volume and the size that it is, people must ask the question, why are people gathered here today? Why are we standing beside a bridge? Why have we picked such a public place to express and display our emotions? These are all valid questions, and they all link back directly to the individual of who we are here to mourn. The individual that we're here to mourn is the 7th grandson of the Holy Prophet ﷺ, whose honorable name is Imam Musa Ibn Jafar al-Kadhim ﷺ. The 7th purest proof of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala's knowledge and wisdom on earth. But why would we gather here at this place and this time? Because as every other person stands against oppression, stands against tyranny, stands against an oppressive society, we stand against a criminal act that took place almost 1400 years ago. We stand for this person's rights that were taken away from him. We've gathered next to this bridge because unfortunately, as history shows, his body was left beside a bridge for 3 days. But what purpose does this serve? For even within inside our own communities, we find that we get arguments and debates. What purpose does it serve for us to gather here dressed in black, to stand here, to cry, to mourn, to weep? Because what we are trying to show people is that this individual, this peak of eloquence, this individual that was the highest in levels of science, ethics, morality, knowledge, philosophy, psychology, is not just our Imam. He's everyone's Imam. So if you can share in some knowledge, if you can obtain some understanding of our grief and our emotion, and how we in a peaceful and in a harmonious way express our love for our beloved, then you will understand that not everything that you see on social media is true. Not every Muslim is an extremist. Most Muslims are peaceful, and especially the followers of the Ahlul Bayt are lovers of the highest level. And we pray inshallah that we are counted amongst those groups of individuals. Salawat Muhammad wa Ali Muhammad. The ayah that I've mentioned to you directly connects to this individual, which I wish to highlight briefly and shed some light on his existence on this earth. The ayah that I've mentioned to you is a conversation Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is having with a group of individuals, where He says the highest greeting of all greetings, He says, peace be upon you, O individuals who are patient. The reward for such patience is what? Heaven. Patience is directly connected to this individual because one of his titles is Al-Kadhim, which means the one who's patient, but also means the one who's forbearing. Why is this an important concept in today's society, and more now than ever before? Because in the lifetime that we live in, patience seems to be a forgotten concept. Be honest with all of us. Everything that we have now is instant. If I want information on my phone, it takes me 0.23 seconds to Google something. If I want to speak to someone, I expect them to text or reply or call back instantly. If I want food or to order an item, why should I have to wait? Why should there be a delay? So when we talk about patience in today's society, what does patience actually mean? Before I ask you the question, let's say you request something to be delivered and there's a delay. At that moment, I would ask you, what is patience? Many people will say, well, I just have to wait. But are you angry? Absolutely. Have you used possibly foul language? Absolutely. Have you shown that anger to other people because of your lack of having the ability to wait? Absolutely. That's not patience. That's merely just waiting because you have no other choice. An action that we do by ourselves is not just waiting for it, it's defined as patience. There's a second level of looking at patience though. What about actions that are done towards us? Something that is beyond your control. You find that this happens all over the world. Unfortunately, wars happen. Unfortunately, pandemics break out. Unfortunately, disasters happen all over the world. And when people can't have the ability to act upon that, what do we say? Oh, they must be a patient person. But are they? Or are they merely just waiting because it's beyond their control to do anything? Which begs the question, there must be a deeper meaning, a deeper understanding and definition of the word patience. For what we find, and it's not just in our religion and our faith, but across the eons of history, people have spoken about the concept of patience. Aristotle, patience is bitter, but its fruit is sweet. St. Augustine mentions patience. Patience is the companion of the wisdom and the wise. Geoffrey Chaucer from the Canterbury Tales, patience is a virtue. And one that I believe my mother has said to me on more occasions than one, from Lady Curie, all good things comes to those who wait. But in all of these aspects of people talking about patience, they don't define the definition and the methodology and the mindset of how to be patient. We have to look deeper in order to understand that. And that is why we come to the personality of which I wish to speak to you about today. Because in the beautiful history of Islamic ethics and morality, you won't find individuals as patient as the Imams. They are not merely acting on patience. They are the definition and the physical embodiment of patience. If you want to understand patience, don't look in a dictionary. If you want to understand patience, go to the books of history and look at Imam al-Kadhim alayhi salatu wassalam. For you will understand what it means to be forbearing and patient. I will give such an example of his life, but before I do, one must question, where does Imam obtain the source of his patience? Where does Imam obtain the source of his knowledge and his divine guidance? There is only one individual that the Imam can originate that power of sabr, that power of qadhamiyya from. And that individual is none other than the successor of the Holy Prophet, the cousin of the Holy Prophet. For those of you who understand Arabic will understand the titles that I mentioned of him by name. He was Amir al-Mu'mineen, Imam al-Muttaqeen, Sayyid al-Wassayyin, Ghurr al-Muhajirin, Wali al-Siddiqeen, Hujjat al-Rabb al-Alameen, Bab al-Madin al-Ilm al-Yaqeen, Mizan al-Hikma al-Yawm al-Din, Nasr al-Muslimin wal-Mu'mineen, قاتل الفاسقين والمنافقين والمكسرين أسد الله ورسوله غالب كل غالب مظهر العجائب علي بن أبي طالب. Take patience from the man that says, I will be patient until patience is tired of my patience. This is the person that originates the patience of Imam alayhi salatu wassalam. Even Edward Gibbons mentions, a British historian, about the patience and the akhlaq of our master. He says the zeal and the virtue of Ali ibn Abi Talib alayhi salatu wassalam can never be outdone by any member of religion. He united all the qualifications. He was a poet. He was a soldier. He was a saint. He was wisdom. His wisdom still breathes in the collections of morality and religious sayings. Even his enemies, whether they competed with him with the tongue or the sword, they were subdued by the eloquence of his bravery and valor. This is not our words. These are words from Christian historians, British historians. That's why when I mentioned to you the tradition I'm about to say, where Mawla was asked, tell us the definition of patience, he says, verily, patience is to faith as the head is to the body. If you were to cut the head, the body will perish. No doubt, there can be no faith if there is no patience. Which means an individual cannot be patient alone without having iman in what? The truth. Because a patient person will look at how he can benefit not only himself but others through his patience. It will show his morality as he's being patient, because a patient person is calm. A patient person is peaceful. And the tradition that we have that exonerates this example, which explains that Imam alayhi salatu wasalam, Amir al-Mu'mineen, is not just an individual of eloquent words, but he's an Imam of action. He's an Imam of example. And we have such an example, that when the commander of the faithful alayhi salatu wasalam, salawat Muhammad wa ali Muhammad, was heading towards the battle of Nahrawan in order to fight the oppressive regime of the Kharijites. He was approached by an astrologer. We know of these people now today, they put their faith in stars and constellations and star signs and so forth. So this such individual came to our master and said, I've heard that you wish to release your army now. He says, I would advise you, according to the information that I see from the sky, you should delay yourself by 3 hours or so, and you will come back with success. See, they plan, but Mawla plans, and Mawla knows the knowledge of the best of planners. He says to this individual, may I ask you a question? He says, by all means. He says, your words cannot be upheld, for Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala surely says in the Holy Quran, only He has the knowledge. Only He knows the hour. Only He knows when rain descends. Only He knows what is in the womb of the mothers. Only He will know what will happen tomorrow. Only He will know who dies. Allah is knowing and all aware. The astrologer says, I have no knowledge of this. The Imam says, then I'll ask you a question about something you do have knowledge. Tell me, what stars will give you the information of who owns the leadership in China? The astrologer says, I don't know this knowledge. He says, then tell me what stars stir the hearts of the animals, like the camels in the desert. He says, I have no knowledge of this. He says, tell me then, what stars, when they move in constellation, stir the hearts of animals like cats and dogs? He says, I don't know this knowledge. He goes, then at least tell me what stars could tell you what are underneath the hooves of my sawari. Tell them, O stars, ask them, what is under the feet of Duldul Badshah? Maybe if you know this, then I can say you have some knowledge. He says, I don't know, but you tell me. He says, underneath the hooves of Duldul lies under the ground a pot of gold. Under that pot of gold lies a serpent that sleeps. Dig and you will see. The astrologer begins to dig and removes the pot of gold, removes the serpent and says, by God, I don't have knowledge over what you have knowledge. Meaning that when you have patience, you don't get distracted by other people. You stay steadfast on the goal that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has set you for. And with that in mind, I leave you with one last tradition. Because we are here to mourn who? Imam al-Kadhim alayhi salatu wassalam. So it is only befitting that I give you one of the greatest examples of his patience. For in this first example, it proves about patience when you have to do an action. But what happens when something befalls you? For in the case of Imam al-Kadhim alayhi salatu wassalam, we find he lived in a time of great oppression. There were individuals that would insult him by name directly. And we're not talking about the general public. The tradition that I narrate to you is that the governor of Medina, the governor, meaning the person in charge of the city, came out and insulted him and his father by name, meaning referring to Amir al-Mu'mineen. Imam didn't say a word. Again the governor came out and said, you know your father, X, Y, and Z, na'udhu billah, and said even more horrific words. His companion said, Mawla, let us slay him. Let us take his blood. We can't bear the insult. Imam says, let him be for me. Again the individual insults Imam. And they say, enough. Imam says, I will show you what it means to act like al-Qadhi. I will show you what it means to be patient. Imam alighted his horse. He went to the man's house. This man had a massive field. He allowed his horse to trample on every single part of that field. Now some of you may say, isn't this an act of anger? Isn't this an act of violence? The governor comes out, sees what Imam has done, alayhi salatu wasalam, and directly says to him, I knew that you were such and such, and I insulted your father as such and such because this is your akhlaq. The Imam doesn't say any angry words. He says, tell me, oh man, how much is the worth of this field? Says the man says it's 200 dirham. He says, here is 300 dirham, and I await to hear what you will say tomorrow. When Imam came back, the companion said, what happened? He said, you'll see tomorrow. The next day, the man came back. He collapsed at the feet of the Imam and said, Assalamu alayka ya ibn al-Zahra. Assalamu alayka ya ibn al-Amir al-Mu'mineen. The companion said, what happened? He said, every area which his sawari put his hoof, the vegetation and the growth of that has come back and more. The money he gave me, triple that is what he's given back to me. Imam then looked at his companion and said, is your way better or is my way better? When you act in patience, you hold steadfast to the path that you're on, and the barakah and the reward of Jannah will follow. It's heartbreaking to think that such a great personality had to suffer in such a horrific way. For those of you who know, before Imam was taken from Saudi Arabia in Medina to Baghdad, he was in front of the grave of his grandfather. Imam al-Kadhim alayhi salatu wassalam would spend his nights and his days praying in front of the grave of his grandfather. On one occasion he was praying to his grandfather. Some narrations say he made a dua saying, "Oh Allah, protect me from the prison of Harun al-Rashid." Can you imagine Imam, the Hujjah of Allah, was praying to God to protect him from such a prison, from such a dungeon, because he knows his body would be tortured and beaten in that dungeon. Allahu Akbar. While in Salah, the narrations say that the army of Harun al-Rashid, la'natullahu alayh, entered the qabr of Rasulullah and began to drag Imam al-Kadhim. He began to drag your Imam. You imagine in front of the grave of the man that brought Salah, his grandson is praying, and before he's allowed to finish his Salah, they are dragging him back to Iraq. Allahu Akbar. The narrations say that when he was taken to Iraq, they shackled him, they chained his arms and his neck, and they dragged him to Baghdad. Imam didn't just spend one day in prison, not 1 month. The narrations say Imam was in prison for almost 10 years of his life, that up to the point of death he still remained in prison. On another narration they said after Imam had been poisoned, the Shia of the Imam said, "Where is our Imam? We haven't seen him, we can't speak to him." They say that the Mal'oons wanted to leave the Shia and the lover of the Ahlul Bayt with a message to break their hearts and spirits. What they did was that they chained the body of the Imam while they placed his body on a bridge. Then they screamed out to the people who loved your Imam, "Oh Shia, come and see the one you said that could not die." The narrations say someone screamed, if he is dead, why have you still put chains around his neck and his arms? When they came to wash his body, they saw that the chains had actually cut into his wrists and neck. Allahu Akbar. When they asked about the chains, they said, we wanted you to know that as he was a prisoner in life, we left him as a prisoner in death. This was the masa'ib of the Imam. But I leave you with this one line. There was a body of the Imam, the great-grandfather of the Imam, that was treated in a brutal manner as well. His body wasn't abused by chains. His body wasn't broken by stones only. The narrations say that Abi Abdullah, on the day of Ashura, the noise of the bones being snapped as the horses rode over him echoed across time.